The engine roars echoed through the narrow alley as a group of burly bikers cornered a teenage boy against the brick wall. The sound of revving motorcycles, accompanied by jeering laughter, created an ominous symphony that would send chills down anyone's spine. At first glance, the teen appeared unassuming. A wiry frame, messy dark hair, and a hoodie that seemed too big for him. He looked like a boy who should have been home doing his homework, not trapped by 5 leather-clad men who towered over him. "Hey, kid," one of them sneered, stepping off his bike. His voice was gravelly, laced with menace. The others joined in with laughter as the leader reached out, gripping the boy's hoodie. "What are you doing on our turf, huh? You lost or just stupid?" The boy didn't flinch. He didn't tremble, didn't plead for mercy. His brown eyes remained locked on the man's face, calm and unnervingly steady. This unnerved the biker, but he didn't show it. Instead, he shoved the boy against the wall with a sneer. "You think you're tough," the biker taunted, pulling out a chain and letting it dangle menacingly. The others revved their bikes, the noise rattling the boy's eardrums. "Let's see how tough you really are." Still, the boy didn't speak. He simply adjusted his stance, his shoulders relaxed but balanced, as though preparing for something. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it didn't escape the leader's notice. "Is he smiling?" one of the bikers asked, his voice tinged with unease. Before they could process what was happening, the teen moved. Like a blur, he grabbed the leader's wrist, twisting it sharply. The man let out a cry as the chain clattered to the ground. With a swift kick, the boy knocked the biker backward into his companions. The alley erupted into chaos. The bikers charged at him, their confidence now replaced with anger. But the teen wasn't just quick, he was as precise. Each movement was calculated, each strike perfectly timed. He ducked under a swing, countered with an elbow to the gut, then pivoted to avoid a knife that one of the bikers had drawn. The fight wasn't messy or frantic. It was almost like a choreographed dance. One by one, the bikers fell to the ground, groaning in pain. The last man standing stared at the boy, his hands shaking. "What the hell are you?" he whispered. The boy tilted his head, wiping a smudge of dirt off his hoodie. His calm demeanor was almost scarier than the fight itself. "I'm just someone who doesn't like bullies," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. The man scrambled back onto his bike, dragging his injured companions with him. Engines roared as they sped off, their bravado shattered. The boy watched them disappear into the distance, his expression unreadable. But just as he turned to leave, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. He froze, his calm exterior cracking for the first time. What now? The flashing red and blue lights painted the alley in an eerie glow as the police car skidded to a stop at the mouth of the narrow passage. The teen quickly glanced around, considering his options. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear of the bikers, but from what came next. 2 officers stepped out of the vehicle, their hands already hovering near their holstered weapons. One was tall and broad, his graying hair hinting at years of experience. The other was younger, with a sharp jawline and an eager expression that betrayed his inexperience. "There he is," the younger cop said, pointing at the teen. "Got a call about a fight. Looks like you're our troublemaker." The boy raised his hands slowly, palms open. His voice was steady when he replied, "I was defending myself. They came after me." The older cop squinted, scanning the alley. He saw the scattered chain, the marks on the brick wall, and a dropped biker jacket. "Looks like a gang fight to me," he muttered. "Gang fight," the teen repeated, his calm slipping into frustration. "It wasn't." "Save it," the younger officer snapped, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Turn around and keep your hands where I can see them." The boy hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he knew that would only make things worse. Slowly, he turned and placed his hands behind his back. The cold steel of the cuffs bit into his wrists as the younger cop secured them tightly. "You don't even want to hear my side?" the boy asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. The older cop gave him a hard look. "We'll sort that out downtown. For now, you're coming with us." As they led him to the squad car, the boy glanced back at the alley, his mind racing. He had done nothing wrong, but that didn't seem to matter. He could feel the weight of judgment in the way they looked at him, as if his guilt had already been decided. The ride to the station was tense. The younger cop couldn't stop glancing at him in the rearview mirror, a smug grin on his face. "What's a kid like you doing in an alley like that?" he asked mockingly. "Trying to join a gang." The boy didn't respond. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "You're awful quiet," the cop continued. "Got something to hide?" "Enough, Smith," the older cop said, his tone firm. Smith shrugged but didn't say anything else. At the station, the boy was led into a holding cell. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound reverberating in his ears. He sat on the cold bench, his mind replaying the events of the alley. Hours passed. He heard bits and pieces of conversation from the officers outside the cell, their voices carrying through the air. Words like gang affiliation and troublemaker floated toward him, making his stomach churn. Finally, a door opened, and a man in a suit walked in. He was middle-aged, with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The officers snapped to attent, eye on as he approached. "Who's in the cell?" the man asked, his voice calm but authoritative. "Just some kid we picked up," Smith replied dismissively. The man raised an eyebrow. "What's his name?" The older cop glanced at the clipboard in his hand. "Elliot Carter." The man froze. He turned slowly, his gaze narrowing as he looked at the boy through the bars. Elliot met his eyes, and for the first time that day, he allowed a small, knowing smile to cross his face. The man took a step closer to the cell, his voice low but firm. "Release him. Now." Smith laughed nervously. "Sir, we're still processing." "Do it," the man interrupted sharply. The officers exchanged confused glances, but complied. The door creaked open, and Elliot stepped out, his calm demeanor returning as he dusted off his hoodie. "Who are you?" Smith asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. Elliot turned to face him, his eyes steady. "I guess you'll find out soon enough." The man in the suit gestured for Elliot to follow him. As they walked out of the station together, the boy's mind was already racing ahead. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The quiet hum of the sleek black car was the only sound as Elliot sat in the passenger seat, his mind racing. The man who had walked him out of the station hadn't said much since they'd left. Instead, he kept his focus on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside Elliot. Finally, the silence was broken. "You handled yourself well in there," the man said, his voice calm but with a hint of admiration. Elliot turned to look at him, studying the stranger's sharp features and calculating eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone direct. The man glanced at him briefly before returning his focus to the road. "Marcus Cole. I'm with the state attorney's office." Elliot's eyebrows shot up. "The state attorney's at D. Vice? Why were you at the station?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Let's just say I make it a habit to check in on cases that stand out." Elliot frowned, not entirely satisfied with the vague answer, but he let it go for now. "What happens next?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "That depends on you. The officers who arrested you made a series of mistakes, big ones. If you want, we can take action against them." Elliot's jaw tightened as he thought back to the smug expressions of the cops, the way they had dismissed him without a second thought. "They need to be held accountable," he said firmly. Marcus nodded. Good, but it won't be easy. Cases like this tend to draw a lot of attention, and not all of it will be positive. Elliot met his gaze, his determination clear. I'm not afraid of attention. Marcus smiled faintly. I figured as much. The car slowed as they approached a tall, modern building with gleaming glass windows. Marcus parked and turned to face Elliot. Before we go inside, I need to know something, Marcus said, his tone serious. What happened in that alley? The whole story. Elliot took a deep breath, his mind flashing back to the chaotic scene. I was on my way home when those bikers surrounded me. They started making comments, calling me names, accusing me of things I didn't do. When I tried to walk away, one of them grabbed me. That's when I fought back. Marcus listened intently, nodding as Elliot spoke. Did anyone see what happened? Elliot shook his head. Not that I know of. It all happened so fast. Marcus frowned, his mind clearly working through the implications. Without witnesses, it'll be your word against theirs. But the fact that they fled the scene works in your favor. They got out of the car and entered the building. Marcus led Elliot to a conference room where a folder was waiting on the table. He opened it and slid a photo across to Elliot. These are the officers who arrested you, Marcus said. Do you recognize them? Elliot's stomach churned as he stared at the faces of the two men who had dismissed him so easily. He nodded. Yeah, that's them. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Their records aren't exactly spotless. Complaints of misconduct, excessive force, racial bias. But nothing's ever stuck. Until now. Elliot's eyes narrowed. What do we do? Marcus's smile returned, but this time it had a sharp edge. We build a case, and we make sure this time it sticks. Before Elliot could respond, the door to the conference room burst open. A young woman rushed in, her face pale. Marcus, she said urgently, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet, and Marcus's expression darkened as he read whatever was on the screen. What is it? Elliot asked, his stomach knotting. Marcus set the tablet down and met Elliot's gaze. The officers who arrested you, they're claiming you attacked them first. Elliot's heart sank. That's a lie, Marcus nodded. I believe you, but now it's your word against theirs, and we just stepped into a much bigger fight. The weight of the situation pressed down on Elliot, but he refused to back down. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let the lies of two corrupt cops undo him. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus stood, his expression resolute. They've made their move. Now it's our turn. The quiet of the conference room was shattered by the enormity of Marcus's revelation. Elliot's fists clenched on the table as he fought to contain the anger bubbling within him. The sheer audacity of the officers to twist the story in their favor was infuriating. But Elliot knew one thing. They weren't going to get away with it. Marcus tapped the tablet, bringing up more details. They filed an official statement, he said grimly. They claim they approached you because you matched the description of someone reported for theft. When? They tried to question you. They allege you became hostile and attacked them. Elliot slammed his hand on the table, making the young woman who had rushed in flinch. That's a complete lie. I never attacked anyone. They came at me aggressively from the start. I barely said 2 words before they slapped cuffs on me. Marcus raised a hand to calm him. I know, and that's why we're going to dismantle their story piece by piece. But for that, I'll need you to stay level-headed. They're betting on you losing your cool so they can paint you as the bad guy. Elliot took a deep breath, his chest heaving as he tried to rein in his frustration. Fine. What's the plan? Marcus gestured to the young woman, who stepped forward hesitantly. This is Riley. She's one of our best investigators. She's going to dig into the officers' backgrounds while I work on getting statements from anyone who might have been near the alley during the incident. Riley's also going to check if there's any surveillance footage from nearby buildings or traffic cameras. Riley nodded, her expression determined. We've already pulled some preliminary records on the officers. Officer Klein has 5 previous complaints against him, 3 for excessive force, 2 for racial profiling. Officer Harper has fewer, but one of them includes a settled lawsuit. Elliot's eyes widened. Why are these guys still on the force? Marcus's jaw tightened. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's one thing to file a complaint. It's another thing to prove it. That's why this case is so important. If we can expose their pattern of behavior, we might be able to hold them accountable, not just for you, but for others they've wronged. Just as Marcus finished speaking, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's the DA's office. Give me a minute. He stepped out of the room, leaving Elliot alone with Riley. The silence between them was heavy until she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. You're handling this better than most people would, she said. Elliot shrugged, though the tension in his shoulders was evident. I don't really have a choice, do I? Riley smiled faintly. True, but still, it takes a lot of strength to stay calm when the system's stacked against you. Before Elliot could respond, Marcus re-entered the room, his expression grim. We've got a problem. Elliot straightened in his seat. What now? Marcus held up his phone. The officers have already leaked their version of events to the press. News outlets are running with headlines about a violent suspect resisting arrest. They're painting you as the aggressor. The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of the situation settled over them. Elliot's mind raced, thinking of how his name and face were likely being dragged through the mud as they spoke. This just keeps getting better, he muttered bitterly. Marcus set his phone down with a decisive thud. We'll counter it. I'll issue a statement from the state attorney's office condemning the leak and emphasizing that you haven't been charged with anything. But we need to act fast. Riley, focus on finding that footage. If we can prove they approached Elliot aggressively, it'll blow their story apart. Riley nodded and hurried out of the room, leaving Marcus and Elliot alone. For the first time, Marcus's confident demeanor wavered slightly. This is going to get messy, Elliot, he said quietly. The media's involved now, and that means public perception will play a big role in how this unfolds. Are you ready for that kind of scrutiny? Elliot met his gaze, his eyes burning with determination. I didn't ask for this fight, but I'm not backing down now. Marcus nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Good, because we're just getting started. Just as Marcus finished speaking, his phone buzzed again. This time, his expression darkened further as he read the message. What is it? Elliot asked, bracing himself for more bad news. Marcus looked up, his voice heavy. Klein and Harper are holding a press conference tomorrow. They're doubling down on their story. The gravity of the situation hit Elliot like a punch to the gut. If the officers were going public, it would make dismantling their lies even harder. But as the initial shock wore off, a new resolve took its place. Then we better be ready, Elliot said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing around him. The next morning, Elliot sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The headline flashing across the news on his phone felt surreal. Officers Klein and Harper speak out against alleged aggressor. His picture, coupled with words like resisting arrest and violent suspect, made his stomach churn. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept into his mind. How could anyone believe his side of the story after this? A knock at the door broke through his thoughts. Marcus entered, holding a file in one hand and his ever-present phone in the other. We need to move fast, he said without preamble. Their press conference is scheduled for noon. Riley's been working through the night, and we have something. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Something. Marcus tossed the file on the bed. A lead. A surveillance camera from a nearby pawn shop caught part of the incident. The angle isn't perfect, but it shows enough. It's clear they approached you aggressively. No sign of resistance, just them grabbing you. Elliot exhaled sharply, relief mingled with frustration. That's great, but will it be enough? They've already planted their version of events in people's minds. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's why we're not stopping there. Riley's digging into their complaint history, and we've already found a witness who saw them pull you into the alley. She's willing to testify. Who? Elliot asked, hope flickering in his chest. A street vendor. She was packing up her cart when it happened. She said she didn't step in because she was scared, but she saw enough to know they didn't give you a chance to explain yourself. Elliot nodded slowly, absorbing the information. So, what's the plan? Marcus's eyes narrowed with focus. We're going to hold our own press conference, today. I've already drafted a statement for you. You'll tell the public what happened, set the record straight, and make it clear that you're fighting back. We'll also release the surveillance footage to the media. If we play this right, we'll turn the tide. Elliot felt a wave of apprehension. Speaking out meant exposing himself to even more scrutiny. But he knew it was the only way to fight the lies being spread about him. Let's do it, he said, his voice firm. Hours later, Elliot stood at a podium in a packed room, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. He gripped the edges of the wooden surface, steadying himself as Marcus gave him a reassuring nod from the sidelines. Clearing his throat, Elliot began. Good afternoon. My name is Elliot Lawson, and I'm a state attorney. Yesterday, I was wrongfully detained by officers Klein and Harper, who accused me of crimes I did not commit. I was treated aggressively and without cause, and now they're trying to paint me as the villain. The room fell silent as Elliot continued. This isn't just about me. This is about accountability. How many others have faced similar treatment, but didn't have the means to fight back? How many voices have gone unheard because of abuse of power? As he spoke, Marcus signaled to a technician at the back of the room. The surveillance footage began playing on a screen behind Elliot, showing the officers grabbing him without provocation. Gasps rippled through the audience. Elliot turned back to the reporters. This footage speaks for itself. I refuse to let lies tarnish my name, and I won't let these officers hide behind their badges to avoid accountability. When he finished, the room erupted into a frenzy of questions, but Marcus quickly stepped in, ushering Elliot away from the podium. We've said what we needed to. Let the footage do the rest. Later that evening, Elliot sat in Marcus's office, scrolling through social media. To his surprise, the public response was overwhelmingly in his favor. The footage and his powerful speech had turned the tide, with people demanding the officers be investigated. Just as a glimmer of hope began to settle in, Marcus walked in, his expression grim. I just got off the phone with Riley, he said. She found something else. Elliot raised an eyebrow. What now? Marcus placed a thick folder on the desk. There's a cover-up in the works. The precinct is scrambling to protect Klein and Harper. Internal Affairs has been slow to respond, and it's no coincidence. Elliot's heart sank. So, they're still trying to bury this. Marcus nodded. Yes. But now, we have more evidence. Riley found emails and internal memos showing that complaints against Klein and Harper were repeatedly dismissed. It goes deeper than we thought. Elliot's jaw tightened. Then we take this higher. If the precinct won't act, we'll go straight to the Attorney General. Marcus nodded. Exactly. But be ready, Elliot. The closer we get to the truth, the harder they'll fight back. Elliot leaned back in his chair, the weight of the battle ahead pressing down on him, but he refused to let it break him. Let them fight, he said quietly. I'm not backing down. Don't forget to follow, like, and share for more gripping stories.